Most protagonists of Assassin's Creed don't have the luxury of sticking around for long. While the series' first two protagonists, Ezio and Altair, had many further appearances in spin-off titles and expanded media, Assassin's Creed has since changed direction, with a shift from following one protagonist across multiple entries to switching every game to make sure each entry had a different era in history. This is when Assassin's Creed fundamentally changed, from having its characters be the main marketing appeal to the settings instead, which left a lot of newer characters in this franchise only really getting one entry to shine in, before the next one took over. This is how every character since Ezio has been treated, and this brings us on to today, where we will be tackling a character study on the protagonist of Assassin's Creed 3, Connor Kenway, and see if he was restricted by only having a single outing, or if this first attempt to tell a self-contained narrative was a successful one on the part of Ubisoft. Also, in terms of the background gameplay, I'm going to be using the 2019 remaster for its improved lighting and overall nicer aesthetic for the graphics of the game. However, this remaster did a cardinal sin when it came to the characters' faces, so when talking about specific scenes, I will be using gameplay from the original to capture the best portrayal of the characters' emotions and actors' performances. With that said, welcome back to my Assassin's Creed character study series, where we take a deeper look into the protagonists of Assassin's Creed. So far, we've taken a look at Ezio, Edward and Arno, with a special detour looking at Adewale and Freedom Cry as well. If you're new to the series, the card is on screen now for you to take a look at the other entries, and please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on the next one. These videos take a long time to produce and I would massively appreciate it. As per usual, we'll start by looking at the character and design, the story and setting, and finally conclude with how the character was handled. Today, our study is on my personal favourite and most highly requested for the series, Connor Kenway, and his search for freedom and equality during the American Revolution, bringing the Assassin's Brotherhood back out of the shadows to their former glory, and building a bright new future along the way. Connor came under a lot of scrutiny following Ezio's triumphant reign for his stoicism and sincerity. Many found him to be boring and lackluster. Were they right, or was it an unfair comparison? Let's take a closer look. Connor Kenway, or Ratnagaden, is a half-British, half-Native American, born in 1756, and raised under the Kanyenkahaka tribe of Mohawks. During this time, contrary to both Ubisoft and the title of this video, he chose not to adopt his father's surname. So, little fun fact here, canonically, he is never actually called Connor Kenway, and his full name is simply Ratnagaden, or his adopted name, Connor. Connor stayed in his village until he was 13. Sorry, he's meant to be... That is not a 13-year-old. Connor left his village to become an assassin, after a voice from the Apple of Eden instructed him to seek out their insignia, and after 10 or so years of training, he comes out of it as the sole member of the Colonial Brotherhood, and sets out to dismantle the Templar Order, all the while protecting his village from being caught in the crossfire of the British and American conflict. Connor's defining traits are his bluntness and introspection. While he still shows a youthful arrogance, he is driven by a strong sense of justice and devotion to his people. His personality is a vast departure from a lot of the other Assassin's Creed protagonists, and received a lot of criticism for his lack of charisma or charm, which made him rather less likeable upon a first impression compared to Ezio. There was a bigger cultural disconnect than expected, and it has led Ubisoft to maybe play it safer with their character choices. In terms of design, let's start with Connor's Kanien Kahaka outfit, which is fairly simple, and uses materials crafted by his village, and resembles more of a homemade appearance, with signs of patchwork and repair being done over time. This outfit is a simple light brown colour, which would have been effective when hunting to blend into the natural world, when hiding in bushes or trees. We also have a fresh-faced Connor in this outfit, with his hair messy and untamed with a braid that may have been part of his tribe to associate himself with them. While the outfit has very little personality to it, it does show Connor's upbringing, and is a representation of the people Connor is fighting for throughout the story. The red belt may be a subtle nod to prior protagonists such as Ezio and Altair, who both possess this as part of the brand's recognisable features. It also suggested that the clan mother recognises the insignia, and so she has experience with the assassins before, which could be why their motif carries across. And her ancestors also received an Apple of Eden from Ivor in Valhalla, so the tribe is certainly no stranger to the assassin's lore. Connor's trousers in this outfit carry over into his assassin robes, and so naturally there's a bit of information to be found here regarding them. His moccasin shoes are crafted from a tanned deer hide, which was a common material for the time. This could imply that he had to hunt this deer down himself, and that this would be a regular occurrence due to his age, where his feet would be growing and consistent hunting could have been necessary. This would tell us that Connor is an experienced hunter, from his shoes alone. His trousers are leggings popular amongst cattle herders, which included tassels and a thick leather material. These chaps are missing a crotch area, so that when riding on horseback, the rider has the full range of movement, but also the material covering their legs is designed to not harm the horse, or the rider with rope burns, being possible when on the move. Clans like Connor's will have treated animals with the utmost respect, and so making sure not to harm them unnecessarily, it makes sense therefore that these would carry over into his assassin robes, since their practical purpose could not be outshone by any other form of trouser, and the frontiersman would also adopt these for traversal. During the time skip, we see Connor's unkempt and messy hair disappear, and he ties it back into a ponytail. You can tell here that Connor means business, and isn't going to let his hair get in the way when on his mission. Ezio also had a ponytail, but it was a longer and looser one, whereas Connor's is slicked back and held tightly, so there's no chance of it slipping. The reason he never cuts his hair is part of the Iroquois tradition, where long hair represented peace, and Connor followed the law of great peace during the events of the game, when he believed that Charles Lee was responsible for his village burning down, and it's only after he discovers it was Washington that he realises his quest has been out of a lust for vengeance and not justice. It's only then that he decides to shave his head, leaving a mohawk in the middle, which violates the Great Peace, and goes to a darker place, which is why he leaves a strip down the middle, as it was a way of representing that he would find his way back when the deed has been done. So the warrior has a promise to return once they've found peace again. It's still part of the design, so I will say now that we do in fact see in comic book form that Connor's hair grew out again after the events of the game, which means that yes, he did indeed find this peace once again. Which is nice. Now getting on to Connor's assassin robes, it's clear when looking at the making of Assassin's Creed 3 that Connor's design went through a myriad of changes, and started out looking similar to the prior games, with a red and white colour palette. However, the decision was made to move Connor's scheme to blue and white, with red still present on his belt, to show particularly that he didn't want to take a side in the revolution. Original concepts for Connor had the idea that his robes were scrounged together from fallen soldiers, and so his robes may have had bits and pieces from both the British and Americans, which were dropped for narrative purposes in the final game. The game director for Black Flag did confirm on Twitter that Connor's robes were some part handed down from Edward, and that the Black Flag team had reverse-engineered Edward's robes based on the idea that Connor would inherit them, which is not particularly canonised anywhere, and I'm almost inclined to not believe this, as the robes are actually Achilles's, and were made for his son to inherit when he was old enough, and there's no period where Connor could have been given Edward's robes, since we know Haytham sure didn't have them when he came across to America, because he was a Templar, and having assassin robes would have looked a little bit suspicious. The elephant in the room is also that Edward's robes don't resemble Connor's at all, aside from maybe the uniform part at the top. But AC3 is set over 50 years after Black Flag, and after the conditions Edward's outfit was put under, I highly doubt the material would have remained intact for that long. Although they aren't narratively meant for Connor, the robes were designed with him in mind, so the blue colours could also add to showing off the different character that Connor is. He is calmer and quieter, so a cool blue will reflect this nicely, but the red sash adds the hint of violence, and the capability to lose his cool. Unlike prior games, this is also a rather dirty time in history, and during a war it'd be difficult to maintain the pristine whites of Ezio's time, so having the outfit be an off-white colour with noticeable darkened areas shows that not only have these robes been kept by Achilles for at least a decade without being touched, but the leather has also worn as a result. Much like his character being blunt and straightforward, his costume serves the most practical function over form, more than any other character in the series. Connor also now sports a military shirt and continental trousers, which present the highly militarised aesthetic of Connor's outfit. This game is, of course, set during an all-out war, and so to survive, Connor needs the best defence he can for his outfit. Other additions include a continental US military coat that has the underparts sewed back for increased mobility, and a leather bracer for Connor's switchblade that has leather over the blade to conceal and protect it. All these thick leather and military garments give Connor a large, imposing silhouette, and considering he is the only assassin in the game, he feels like he has the entire future of the Brotherhood on his shoulders. To round this outfit off, we have the small unique additions Connor injects into the outfit, to make it feel like his own, with his personality shining through, like a traditionally handcrafted armband, with an accompanying feather and the Native American symbol of the eagle on the beak of his hood. This gives you a visual reminder throughout the game of Connor's primary motivation, and also his heritage, which adds to his personality and how he chooses to carry himself. Connor also gets the instantly cool fingerless gloves, which will help when scaling large rock faces or trees. I think these look great to complete the look, and show just how much is lost in the design when these are taken away, as in every game since Assassin's Creed 3 that Connor's outfit appears, the fingerless gloves are for some reason absent, and I notice this every single time I play it, as it makes his arms look plain without that different material to break it up. And I don't know whether it's a case where the character's hands would have been clipping through the texture and it would have been far too difficult, but it's also the case for Altair's outfit in this very game, so this has been a long-standing issue and I'm not sure why. I do want to quickly mention that Connor has a naval alternative costume that he wears in naval sequences, and this isn't one you can unlock in free roam. Although there are several similar ones, this is unique to when you complete missions on the Aquila, and it's never really explained how these robes are acquired. However, they are primarily a long blue admiral's coat with a military blue shirt, and a similar design to his normal robes for the middle section with the buttons. The only major difference here is that Connor doesn't have his Native American trousers, and instead has more of an Edward-looking large pirate boot, and cotton trousers which may just be to fit the whole captain look, but also these would be the most practical to use when on a ship with slippery surfaces. I'm going to be honest though, and I just don't think this design is very good. It feels quite thrown together at the last minute, and the big boots clash with Connor's design that emphasised his upper body. It makes Connor look kinda short and stubbly, and I think it's a little bit silly. The hood is also gone and replaced with a tricorn, and it does make Connor somewhat resemble his father more, which I guess a parallel is there to be made, but I don't think is very in character, and it never really fit properly. There is one piece of concept art that I prefer, which features him in his normal outfit, but with the captain's cloak over the top, and he still has a tricorn, which I think still emphasises his broad shoulders enough that he still looks menacing and imposing, and almost disrespecting the other seafarers by not wearing the costume properly. Gives him a bit of a rebellious persona that injects his character with more likability. Now let's talk about Connor's arsenal, since we can't go without mentioning the iconic assassin tomahawk that was featured heavily as the game's main iconography. It does remind me of a simpler time when this goofy little addition was the furthest the law got from being grounded. A tomahawk is a staple tool for the Mohawks, and we see its significance come into play during the story. The design of the assassin logo may be one to either make you roll your eyes or get chills, and I definitely sit in the camp of liking it. I think it's a pretty neat addition, and it's not like it doesn't work as an actual weapon, so I don't see a reason not to have it. Connor does have other tomahawks available that are much closer to being historically accurate, and I do appreciate that the option is there for those that do find it too silly to use. Whilst AC Brotherhood and Revelations featured a crossbow, the bow and arrow was a much more interesting development, as you got it from the start, and it had multiple purposes, for being good at combat when you needed a quieter ranged weapon, but also for hunting at long range, when you needed to acquire pelts from larger and more dangerous foes, to complete frontiersman missions. Connor will also equip items from outside sources, like the rope dart, which lets you hang enemies from trees, or the flintlock pistols, for better results in combat, but will damage resources when hunting. Putting them all together brings us a design that was incredibly well thought out, and looks incredible in the game. And while I wouldn't say it's my favourite robes, just because I do have a bias towards Altair's, I do think these robes are the best designed in terms of fitting the time period and creating a powerful silhouette for Connor. Set between 1760 and 1783, Assassin's Creed 3 depicts the events of the American Revolution, detailing the crucial moments that led up to the Revolutionary War, and major events throughout, such as the Boston Tea Party and the Battle for Bunker Hill. For the first time in the series, we aren't going to be starting off from the beginning of the game, as Connor isn't even mentioned by name until the 4th of 12 sequences, which means for the first quarter of the game, we don't meet our protagonist at all. Because of this, I feel it's important to mention the pacing of Assassin's Creed 3. Most players in 2012 grabbed a copy of AC3 and saw Connor on the box, when we start the game playing as an altogether different character. Hatham is Connor's father, however that's not made apparent unless you had prior knowledge. For the first quarter of the game, the player is expected to play as a completely different character and undergo a full storyline before ever meeting the assassin on the box. From a gameplay perspective, nothing is restricted here except for the tree running mechanic, and Hatham does play identical to Connor outside of this, so it doesn't restrict the player in any way, but what it does is lose people's interest, because the first quarter of the game is simply setting up all of the people you will later be targeting as Connor. This does absolutely wonders for the characters and gives us the most fleshed out Templars yet, which we'll come to as they reappear in the story, but it also has some negatives, as players may not be paying attention to any of this character setup because they just want to rush it to get to Connor's bits. The pacing of the game suffers this way because it feels very stop-start, as Sequence 4 is many hours into playing, and the player is only just getting introduced to Connor, which doesn't help first impressions. The first sequence with Connor begins with a narration from his mother, detailing the events that have transpired during a time skip, in which Hatham left her to pursue his Templar ambition, and she fears that Connor will possess the same dark hunger. Connor's mother was very protective of Connor growing up, because of who his father was, and she always wanted to protect him in case he came back. Connor reads this information in a diary that he quickly brushes to the side, which tells us a lot about his character from the offset. He is inquisitive and nosy, going against the rules to find out information that has been kept from him, which already paints him as a character that likes the truth to be told to him plain and simple, and has no interest in secrecy. Also, that he's not a particularly good liar. This interaction informs the player from the offset that Connor isn't a smooth talker like Ezio. He's going to be a very different character that stumbles and makes mistakes. He also possesses a stark difference, as Ezio was completely oblivious to his father's shadier association with the assassins, and was blissfully ignorant of the larger plot at play. However, Connor from his first moments is trying to figure out the bigger picture, which puts him as a much more proactive protagonist from the offset. We get a nice piece of levity as Connor plays hide and seek with his friends, while the adults in the village are out hunting. This gives the game a chance to organically introduce the stealth systems once again to the player, and it also has to be commended that it doesn't play out in a cutscene, and the time is taken to have you play as a young Connor and experience things in his shoes. This is something I also praise Unity for, how we get to play as Arno and make the decision to go against his father's actions to kickstart the events of the game, whilst making you feel guilty for causing it. AC3 carries out a similar approach, where you get to venture outside of Connor's village, which will end up saving his life from the incoming catastrophe. Connor gets interrupted by Templars investigating the area, and comes face to face with the men he will later go on to kill, the most important being that of Charles Lee. We learn here that Connor not only understands but speaks English, no doubt something his mother taught him early on, in the case of this event happening. She has seen firsthand what the British were capable of after being captured and imprisoned during the early chapters of the game. Because of this, we see she is planning to prepare Connor as much as possible for what lies outside their village, in the rest of the world. Connor is hurt by the Templars and choked up against a tree by Charles Lee, who has become much more bitter than his prior appearance, handing out a hefty amount of racism and distaste for Connor's people.
You are a nothing, a speck of dust. You and all your ilk, living in the dirt like animals, oblivious to the true ways of the world. The wiser among you recognize the shape of the future. They throw themselves at our feet and beg mercy.
Charles's appearance in the game is very poorly timed, as George Washington happens to lead an attack on the village, whilst Connor is unconscious. There's much debate as to what the Templars were doing around Connor's village at the time of the attack, but dialogue from Charles implies that they were after the location of the precursor temple, or perhaps the Piece of Eden that they thought could open it. Either way, it's an unfortunate turn of events, as Haytham was not with them to explain that the temple was no longer a priority, or that the village should in fact be protected and not threatened because of Connor's mother living there. Assassin's Creed Rogue later filled in this plot hole by showing why Haytham was not present during this event, and it's because he was in fact working with Shay to stop Achilles from opening another precursor site. However, this precursor site was not the entrance to the Grand Temple, but instead holds a device capable of shifting the tectonic plates of the Earth, so there is a possibility Haytham later assumed the Grand Temple was one of these sites, and sent Charles to go and secure it, but that could just be headcanon. After Charles pours his racist heart out,
you and all your ilk,
Connor is knocked out, and awakens to find his village burning to the ground, with no perpetrator in sight, which makes him assume that it was Charles Lee. And until later revelations, so does the player, and we get a powerful sequence in which Connor is unable to lift the beam his mother is trapped under, and is dragged away before the house collapses, and assumedly would have killed them both. This shows Connor to be incredibly selfless and willing to put his life at risk, without hesitation, to save the ones he loves, even from such a young age. This prologue sets Connor's main motivations in place. His village was destroyed and his mother killed, and he believes Charles Lee was the man behind it all. 9 years later, we are reintroduced to Connor, and genuinely, this kid is not 13. We can see that with time, Connor is worried about the outsiders moving their position closer and closer to his village for hunting. After the village was able to rebuild and continue moving forward, Despite the tragedy, it makes sense why Connor would be more antagonistic and paranoid about anyone he didn't recognise getting closer to the village, even if it was not with malicious intent. Connor puts a lot more of his trust in his village, and the connection is closer between them. He no longer wants to go out and play to get away from his mother's nagging, but instead he wants to reinforce the ideals of the village and train to be better prepared in the outside world. The next sequence features Connor teaching his friend Kanandokon to hunt and navigate in the trees. Tree running was used as a primary feature in the marketing, and at this point in the game it was one of the last mechanics that the game had been holding back to surprise the player with, so this sequence acts as an effective tutorial for that. Despite Connor's rough persona, he only wants to see his friend succeed, and helps him even when he struggles, and motivates him to do his best. Connor definitely possesses leadership qualities, and doesn't look down on people with lesser abilities than himself, but instead helps them and passes on his knowledge, making him a very humbling character to be playing, during this sequence, where you can see his best qualities shine through. During this time, Connor has been questioning why his people do not go outside their village, and why his village in particular chooses to remain neutral in the outside conflict. The clan mother has noticed this and invites Connor into her hut, where he is introduced to a piece of Eden shaped like a mystic ball. This is the reason that the village has been kept in the shadows, because such a powerful weapon could easily fall into the wrong hands. As Connor points out, the enemy is only getting stronger the longer they wait to take action. The piece of Eden then brings the ancient Isu Juno to Connor. I don't know how I feel about this plot point, since it is very contrived, using the sci-fi side of the franchise to move the plot along quickly and give Connor a reason to begin his journey. You have to consider, however, that in the modern day context of the scene, Desmond is quite literally on a ticking clock throughout the whole game to find a key that will prevent the apocalypse, which Juno wants him to find, so she is in turn helping to push Connor along his journey so that Desmond can have a better shot at preventing doomsday. It does sound very complicated, but the scene gives Connor a vision in which he is told to seek out the insignia of the assassins, which his father once bore. If he doesn't, then history will repeat itself. However, this time his village will not be able to recoup, and his people will be lost forever. This starts out our hero's journey as he leaves his comfortable village and journeys into the unknown. I think quite an easy fix for this would be if Connor just recognised the symbol from a drawing his mother had done, based on Haytham's bracer or something the like, and then the clan mother would have went, "Oh, they can help you," setting Connor off on his journey, and it would have avoided a lot of the forced pushing pieces into place and made the story flow better. During the entire opening, the music used sells you on the authenticity of the time, using Native American instruments and vocals, and this makes you appreciate the different culture and their views on the world and traditions. Whilst I can't play any of the tracks, in case the video gets demonetized, I can give you a handy few titles for you to go out and check for yourself. The music in Assassin's Creed 3 is one of the most diverse and powerful the series had, rivaling Revelations, and for the Native American tracks, we have the likes of Connor's Life, Through the Frontier, and Farewell. The integration of the bombastic orchestra mixed in with the percussion instruments leads to a mixing of traditional and modern to show the different aspects of the American Revolution that Connor is internally at war with. The next sequence has Connor travelling across the frontier to seek out the assassin's logo, after the elder of the village bestows him with nothing more than a sleeping bag.
That's it.
However, the gap between sequences shows quite a bit of time passing, and for the first time in the series, Connor almost breaks the fourth wall and gives us an inner monologue which sounds directly aimed at either Desmond or the player. Connor's monologue in sequence 5 gives us a fantastic insight into his thought process, now that we've had some time for the pace of the story to slow down. Connor seems to question the quests he's been given to save his village. He doesn't trust the judgment to run straight after the Templars, and thinks he was too naive and hasty in his pursuit. He comments on how this isn't a choice he's been able to make himself, but if he doesn't take action, then nobody else will. It's a very well written monologue, as it brings up a question that Connor has and can answer at the same time, whilst giving us insights into his thought process and the thoughts others have given him in between the sequences. Eventually, Connor reaches the Davenport homestead, once the home of the Colonial Brotherhood years prior, and here we meet Achilles, a former mentor of the Brotherhood, now reduced to a bitter old man on a hill, and the dynamic between these two develops massively across the game. Their first interaction has great characterization for both Achilles and Connor's first line.
What?
I was told you could train me.
No.
It sums up everything you need to know in just one line. Achilles is rude and dismissive, whilst Connor is completely oblivious and goes straight to the point. This directness naturally gets a swift
No.
and Connor takes shelter in the nearby stables overnight. It's at this point I feel a small segue to explain Achilles would be necessary, as this character has a great deal of backstory given to him in Assassin's Creed Rogue. However, it does more just visualise what we are told in Assassin's Creed 3. Achilles' role serves as a mentor that failed, an example of the assassins losing their way and the Templars succeeding, which we see in Rogue, as all of the American Brotherhood is killed by Shay Cormac, and Achilles is left as the sole survivor, to live out his days knowing he could never make amends. This explains the bitter Achilles in Assassin's Creed 3, and throughout the game we learn more about how he lost his wife and son, which led him into a further spiral. He doesn't realise that his chance for redemption quite literally came knocking. The next day Connor tries once again to talk to Achilles, and this time the music has lightened up a bit to emphasise the playful banter between the two.
Get the hell off my land!
As Achilles teases Connor about being there, and he doesn't seem to be 100% sincere in his berating of Connor, but comes across more like he's testing him. Connor being quite young and naive, he still barges his way through to get to Achilles, and climbs up onto the balcony to try and sneak in.
Just hear me out. What are you so afraid of?
Afraid? You think I'm afraid of anything? Least of all a self-important little scab like you?
This shows both characters aren't stupid, they perfectly understand the other, through just a few exchanges, which creates a connection and relationship between them from the beginning. Achilles leaves this second day by saying that the world has moved on. Clearly a complete lie, since Achilles himself hasn't moved on from what happened with his brotherhood, and Connor's stubbornness and optimism are confusing to him. Connor goes to sleep again in the stables, but this time is awoken by poachers that are attempting to break into Achilles' manor. This is where the game gives us our first combat encounter with Connor using the tomahawk, as he defends the manor from the attack, and showing his blunt optimism again as he refuses to back down when the poachers threaten him. The game will often pose Connor's willpower in both a positive and negative light, showing how his emotional side is a benefit for the people he cares about, but also can lend him to think too much with his heart and make mistakes. It's a great character flaw for someone who was brought up to believe that the world was more black and white. This is an example early on where Connor slips up and doesn't realise. He miscounted the number of enemies, allowing the leader to sneak up behind him during an interrogation and knock Connor to the ground using a war club. I find it interesting that during the combat, the poachers will throw racist remarks at Connor and also proceed to use a weapon by the Iroquois people to attack him. The first encounter Connor has with an enemy outside of his village sets up quite effectively how the next few sequences will realistically handle Connor's heritage. Achilles finally changes his mind, and the back and forth between the two reaches a conclusion, as Achilles, armed with a blade, stealthily dispatches the men with ease, and saves Connor from being assaulted further. After saving his life, the two agree to finally sit down and talk in a civilized manner. What I love about this sequence is that due to AC3 having slow pacing, we get that time for the decisions the characters make to come across more natural and less forced. It makes perfect sense that Achilles would have taken a few days to make his decision, watching Connor from afar and finally seeing that he was willing to put his life on the line to protect the homestead. This harkens back to the ideology that even the first Assassin's Creed game touched upon. In the opening sequence of AC1, Altair is selfish and acts to compromise the Brotherhood by recklessly pursuing Robert de Sabre, which he gets punished for. By comparison, Connor displays a dedication to the tenets of the Creed without even knowing it. He doesn't compromise Achilles just to stay alive. His selflessness is ultimately what rewards him the chance to talk to Achilles, because Achilles can see the qualities in Connor that he lacked. In his youth, Achilles sought after the precursor sites because he felt a sense of responsibility, but it was for no reason other than a superiority complex. He didn't care about the people he would hurt in the process. He threw his assassins at Shea in an attempt to slow him down, without regarding their lives, and resulting in all of them meeting their fates simply from trying to slow down Shea, instead of Achilles owning up to his mistakes and listening to Shea's point of view. Both Achilles and Connor object to tyranny because they feel nobody else will do it. However, Connor feels he has more potential and therefore he can't sit by and let other people suffer, whereas Achilles felt like he was forced into the job because nobody else could be trusted, and he reluctantly agreed. The difference now is that Achilles has wizened and mulled over Haytham's warning to him, and now sees Connor as the person he should have been, and the one that can change the Brotherhood for the better and begin it anew. With all that praise towards Connor, here is a clip of him falling over. The game thankfully knows which parts of the lore to gloss over. The lore at this point was astronomically difficult to sum up in a few sentences, so much that the series used to have massive recaps at the beginning of each game, before they stopped trying to string together a narrative. So just by hand-waving away the history of the series, and just assuming that Connor is now caught up. So at this point you either get it or you don't. I don't see the point in this recap anyway, since Connor already has prime motivation for hunting the Templars, and now he just has a further motivation to do it as an assassin, as if he wasn't already here to do that.
You are a speck of dust, a nothing. You and all your kind, living in the dirt like animals, oblivious to the true ways of the world.
When Connor sees the portraits of Templar operatives, we hear a narration echoing the words Charles Lee said to him in the forest as a child. Up until this point, Connor hasn't spoken outwardly about his feelings towards Charles Lee personally, and bottled it up until seeing his face again. This is a great example of showing the relationship the protagonist and antagonist share. The best villains in the AC franchise are the ones that have a personal effect on the hero. As much as a lot of the targets in Assassin's Creed 1 had pages of dialogue from eavesdropping and pickpocketing, none of them have a personal dynamic with Altair. Their first interaction with him is when they are killed. Whilst these characters were monstrous and left a profound impact on the Holy Land, because they didn't get in the way of Altair, it somewhat lessened their impact. This was quickly rectified in AC2, even from the start, with Alberto being woven into Ezio's story, and being one of the most memorable kills for how he sells out Ezio's family, and not in the way that Ubisoft have. The fact Connor doesn't even acknowledge at first that his father is on that board, and the camera instantly puts focus on Charles, shows Connor's vendetta taking over. He doesn't look straight at the head honcho, but the one he thinks deserves justice the most. It's why I think the Templars in AC3 are the strongest set of antagonists the series has ever had, because it's only when they affect Connor that he decides they must die, even considering keeping Haytham alive because he saw redemption was possible for him. Each one of these Templars interweaves with Connor's story and pushes him into making them a target. They create an interesting dynamic with the protagonist that makes them feel more important and connected to Connor's story. A time skip occurs here where we see Connor has spent time training with Achilles. Connor talks about the importance of not only training his body, but his mind as well.
Achilles taught most often of the Assassins and Templars, their structures, origins, and purpose. Centuries of history condensed into a few short days. I told him of the men who had burned my village, of Charles Lee, and my promise to him. Achilles explained that Lee and his followers were Templars, and that they were led by none other than my own father. If I was to serve the order, these men would become my targets. So I worked harder, learned faster, but for all my progress, it was clear that I still had much to learn. My training had only just begun.
In case you haven't noticed, the game has a lot of exposition. This narration covers a lot of what was already shown to us, but it's the first acknowledgement Connor has towards his father. I therefore have to assume that Connor somehow knew his name as a 4-year-old and remembered it into his teens, so that Achilles could recall it to him. I don't have much to comment on regarding Achilles and Connor's little shopping trip in Boston. It's all very fish out of water kind of stuff that is important at showing Connor adjusting to a different lifestyle and people, and helps the player learn the shopping and notoriety mechanic, whilst Connor naturally gets himself in trouble and needs to lower his notoriety in the city by ripping down posters like in previous games. This whole next hour of the game will be spent learning about side objectives, like the underground tunnels, and most importantly, the homestead missions. These missions involve Connor recruiting people around the colonies to join the Davenport homestead, and their resources will allow Connor to craft and send out shipments for extra income. It's a very in-depth mechanic and leads itself to some fantastic side content, where Connor builds up the community and shares heartfelt moments with them. At long last, we reach the moment Connor earns his assassin robes. It takes half of the entire runtime of the game, but here we finally see Connor as a fully formed assassin, with the skills and training necessary to begin the mission. Everything has been laid out for him, and he's gained everything he'll need going forward.
Once upon a time, we had a ceremony on such occasions. But I don't think either of us are really the type for that. You've your tools and training, your targets and goals. And now you have your title. Welcome to the Brotherhood, Connor.
But then, the pacing of the game once again rears its ugly head, and you're forced out the Animus to play as Desmond. When you return, we get our first target, William Johnson, a member of the colonial right that commanded the Iroquois and colonial forces during the 7 Years' War. He now wishes to keep the interests of the Native Americans aligned with the British, and force them to take a side. He has been interfering in Connor's village and trying to break their peace. This infuriates Connor, and we see his personality flip from what was previously shown. Connor becomes more aggressive and hotter-headed, but still listens to Achilles' advice when approaching him. At this point, Connor feels fully capable of eliminating William Johnson and helping to keep his village neutral, planting a tomahawk in the front pillar of the homestead to mark that his war against the Templars had begun. Arriving in Boston, we get an exchange between Connor and Samuel Adams. Adams owns a slave which upsets Connor and makes him distrustful of him as a man looking for freedom. However, Adams states his quote-unquote slave is actually a free woman and must be a slave on paper for him to hide her away.
Well, it's good to see the people finally taking a stand against injustice.
Says the man who owns a slave.
Ooh, sorry? I practice what I preach, my friend. She's not a slave, but a freed woman, at least on paper.
He also makes excuses for how slow the process is when it comes to helping slaves obtain freedom, which is something Connor is not happy about, and demands that he takes more action and thinks of the people that don't have this time to wait.
Barbarism.
Then speak out against it.
We must focus first on defending our rights. When this is done, we'll have the luxury of addressing these other matters.
You speak as though your condition is equal to that of the slaves. It is not.
The following events lead to Connor and co participating in the famous Boston Tea Party, a political protest in which 342 boxes of tea were dumped into the ocean to combat the rising tax prices the British were placing on the tea trade. In the context of the game, this is what cripples William Johnson's finances and leaves him penniless to barter with the Native Americans and be forced to leave Connor's village alone. It's at the protest that Connor comes face to face with Charles Lee once again. Throughout the sequence building up to the Tea Party, Connor has been getting more and more frustrated that his political allies haven't led to any actual change, and so getting to dump the tea is a more physical demonstration of Connor making a difference, gaining the confidence in what he's doing to drop a crate of tea into the sea whilst staring directly at the Templar onlookers, proud of his accomplishments. Connor tells Achilles that their financial struggles will be enough to stop William Johnson's plans, and that there was no need to kill him. This again shows Connor is a lot more passive. Whilst he frequently gets angry and frustrated, he's not a killing machine, and will hesitate and use killing as a last resort. By this point, he never wanted to kill William Johnson, but only keep him out the way. However, the game still needs an example of the Templars not being redeemable, and so 6 months later, William Johnson returns with all the money he needs. Connor's efforts were useless as the Templars have a surplus of finances, and Johnson has gathered the elders once again to negotiate to join the British, and this time Connor knows what has to be done to stop him coming back. Navigating his way across the frontier, Connor makes his way to Johnson, finding his negotiations to be falling through, as the elders from Connor's village still want nothing to do with the American Revolution, and turn William Johnson away, causing him to turn to threats and start pointing guns at the elders, to force them into alignment, fatally killing all of them if you fail the objective. However, if you get to Johnson before this happens, Connor can land the killing blow. In his closing corridor sequence, Johnson explains his motivation, his saviour complex. He wanted to give the Native Americans purpose so that they would be well looked after when the people in the cities stopped caring about them. Connor rightly points out that Johnson is simply plucking at thin air to come up with an idea that the Iroquois are treated as lesser, and starts killing them when they refuse to see things his way, proving that he did not truly care for what they wanted, but what he wanted them to believe.
I could have stopped it. I could have saved you all.
You speak of salvation, but you were killing them.
Aye, because they would not listen.
Connor doesn't need to have a witty comeback in this scenario, because it's so obvious how misguided Johnson was. Connor simply mocks him by saying that whatever Johnson thought peace looked like, he hoped he was able to find it in his death. I think the dynamic between Connor and William Johnson serves as an eye-opener for Connor. It's the first time he gets the opportunity to talk since his encounter as a child, and William proves to be completely absorbed in his ego and ideology, to the point where he won't listen to others or reason. He judges Connor immediately, as if killing him was a mistake he couldn't believe someone was stupid enough to do. You can see how this experience will be an eye-opener for Connor going forward, and he won't make the same mistake of letting a Templar live to fight another day.
William Johnson is dead, and with him, the Templar plot to steal the land of my people. But in ending this threat, I have revealed another. On his body was a letter addressed to John Pitcairn containing orders to root out and destroy Patriot weapons and supplies. Should he succeed in this, the colonists will be unable to maintain their resistance, and the Templars will surely take control. So long as Pitcairn lives, the danger remains. I need to find him. He needs to die.
The next sequence begins with Connor regretting the need to kill Johnson. Even though time has passed, he still feels the effects his actions have had on his mentality, and Achilles consolidates him and assures him that for his people to be free, there is no doubt that every Templar must be eliminated. He is quick to snap when Achilles mentions that even his father must die, as if Connor would hesitate, which he wishes to dismiss straight away. However, Achilles calls him out on this, knowing his mind is still not made up yet. It makes sense for a boy who's never met his father to want to understand his perspective before eliminating him. This is quickly interrupted, however, by a knock at the door. After Connor's success at the Boston Tea Party, he has gained the favour of the Sons of Liberty. Paul Revere requests specifically to talk to Connor, and while Connor is quick to set it out straight that he is not aligned with their cause and wants to remain neutral, The mention of John Pitcairn pushes him into going to their meeting place and hearing them out. John Pitcairn is the next Templar for Connor to eliminate, a Scottish Marine officer and a member of the colonial right. He attempted to arrest rebel leader Samuel Adams and John Hancock with a plan to negotiate with them once they were in captivity, but was foiled by Paul Revere, who was able to warn the Patriots about the incoming attack, and with the help of Connor, cause Pitcairn to retreat. This whole sequence of the game is very much focused on the revolutionary battles that occurred across Eastern America, pushing back the British forces, which makes it very plot heavy, and little of it is centred around Connor's character. It's less talk, more action, as Connor proves his leadership qualities are up to scratch, by commanding Patriot platoons to defend Lexington and Concord from the British. However, we see Connor isn't too shabby when it comes to being an assassin either, as during the Battle of Bunker Hill, he can sneak on board Pitcairn's ships and rig them to explode in the absolute worst mission to 100% in this entire game. I really hated this mission. Once destroyed, Pitcairn is left with no other choice but to retreat to safety at the top of Moulton's Hill with his remaining soldiers. He may think this is safe, however, unfortunately, he hasn't seen the E3 cinematic trailer to know that Connor can glide his way across the battlefield. However, in a more realistic interpretation, Connor can successfully sneak his way across the battlefield, dodging gunfire, and find a way to Pitcairn's camp. Now, with the complete element of surprise and Pitcairn out in the open, the officer's tactics fail him once again, as Connor successfully kills him. In his dying breaths, John Pitcairn seems to be baffled at the idea of Connor killing him. Once again, another Templar that has been brainwashed into thinking he's in the right. Pitcairn's plan to arrest and negotiate with Hancock and Adams seems to be a ruse, as he still shared Johnson's belief that only under Templar control could people be free. He thought if the Templars could control both the Americans and the British, then it would pave a way for the colonial right to seize control instead. Even when Connor empathises with him and asks if he can carry any kind of message from him, he simply tells them,
"They must lay down their arms. They must stop this war."
Why them and not the Redcoats?
Do you not think we ask the same question of the British? These things take time. And it would have succeeded had you let me play my part.
Part of the puppeteer.
But better we hold the strings than another.
No, the strings should be severed. All should be free.
Similar to Johnson, he preaches to know what people want, but in actuality has no idea. Through these two sequences, we see how the Native Americans and colonists both wish to simply be free, but the Templars are doing everything they can to incite chaos with the British, in the hopes that eventually they can appear the saviours and give the people a better but twisted form of freedom that skews to their beliefs. Connor, rightly so, shows strength at this moment and reinforces that everyone should be free, and as a man of the people, he represents true freedom. However, the Templar plans have already been set in motion, as Connor finds a letter on Pitcairn revealing a plan to kill George Washington. The previous two sequences have been following a formula of sorts, quite similar to the first Assassin's Creed game, in which we talk with the mentor at the beginning, then travel to a new area and complete missions, learning more about our target's motivation before a big set piece to finish them off, followed by returning to the mentor and reflecting. The game is aware that doing this a third time would potentially cause people to learn the pattern of what was happening, and so Sequence 8 starts straight away with a switch up in Connor's personality, which could be a turn-off for many people. Connor brings up a valid question: why doesn't he simply go for his father straight away and cut off the head of the Templar Grand Master?
There is progress, but I worry it is not enough.
You must strike where you need it most. What if you pursued Charles Lee and your father? What then of Paul Revere and the soldiers at Lexington?
Soldiers? There were no soldiers in those towns, only men and women who were forced to defend themselves.
Is this not why you fight? To protect your people? Your struggle is the colonist struggle. In helping one, you help the other.
He becomes impatient and feels like killing Johnson and Pitcairn has led to very little progress. You can feel throughout the prior two sequences that Connor has felt some kind of resentment towards Achilles for making him wait so long to get started. However, Achilles has been much more patient and understands that going directly for the head of the Templar Order will allow the other members to scatter and be impossible to find, and that would spell trouble for Connor's newly found allies.
Fool's errand.
Make no mistake, I still do, but I can't help but feel some pride in your success.
And why should I give you any credit?
But Connor rightfully calls him out on this hypocrisy, as he never trusted Connor in the first place, and yet is piggybacking off his newly found success, as if it was part of the plan all along for Connor to go against his word. I think while it's not good to see Connor and Achilles fight, it is justified here. Achilles' whole motivation in this game is that of getting revenge on Hatham for what happened in AC Rogue. We know from Rogue that Achilles wasn't the voice of reason, and with that hindsight, he can be seen as an antagonist as he takes the credit for Connor's achievements. There comes a question here of whether Achilles sees Connor as a person or just an extension of himself. If Connor can undo Shay's work, then is that a redemption for Achilles, or simply a better man with different morals that happened to be trained by a lesser one?
You're gonna have to try a lot harder than that to impress me.
Is that so, old man? Or perhaps we should step outside. I will gladly demonstrate how easily I could trounce.
It's an interesting question that gets cut off as the plot takes centre stage. This is a conflict that will need to be resolved later. I have no idea how to pronounce this. Benjamin Talmadge? We're going with Talmadge. Is the son of one of Achilles' assassins back in the Colonial Brotherhood. From what little information I found out on this character, he isn't physically present during Rogue, and retired from the Brotherhood beforehand, explaining why he isn't in that game. However, it would have been cool to see this thread tied together a bit stronger. Benjamin himself, however, isn't the most interesting character ever, and more of a plot device, as he magically appears and tells Connor exactly where the next target is. There is one interesting exchange to dissect here, as when they are on horseback, Benjamin says that he chose not to join the assassins because he hoped to have children one day. Connor simply acknowledges this, and I feel this is where the writers missed an opportunity to give us an idea of what Connor's goals were after he saved his village. I understand that he was laser focused on his mission, but a simple bit of insight on whether the fact he would be unable to live a normal life after this was something that Connor had considered. However, one conversation with an assassin recruit named Dobby in a side quest does clear up Connor's thoughts quite well.
How is it a man like you has no wife?
I do not have the time to give a woman what she deserves. Perhaps when all this is over, I will be able to settle and have a family. I hope.
Oh, of all the lecherous and deceitful men out there who have fathers, you'd be a godsend. But I suppose that's how it is. The good ones are too busy for it, and the louts have nothing better to do. In any case, if you ever think it's time, make sure I get the first crack.
I promise.
Following Benjamin and completing a few missions to uncover the next target brings us to Thomas Hickey, a sleazy black market dealer for the Templars. Hickey kept a low profile, as he wasn't the brightest of the bunch and tended to work under Charles's command. We'll go into more detail later, but for now we get a confrontation between Connor and Hickey, in which it seems like this sequence is going to be over quite quickly.
What's this? Thomas Hickey? Might be. What's it to you? Right. Ain't supposed to be none of your kind left. Suppose I'd best be rectifying that then. Get him!
However, the pacing is shaken up as both Connor and Hickey are arrested and sent to prison. And here we have the obligatory prison sequence in an Assassin's Creed game. This prison section is a bit of a slog, and it doesn't really give us too many character interactions, apart from one that I want to focus on later on, where Connor attempts to sneak into Hickey's cell to try and assassinate him, only to find the warden's dead body and both Hickey and Charles Lee waiting for him.
Not who you was expecting, am I right?
What have we here? I thought we'd finished off your kind.
You would like that, wouldn't you? To rid the world of all who do not share your views.
Guilty as charged.
Charles Lee's only motivation is racism. He also questions Connor on how he blindly follows Achilles. Connor being an activist for freedom and the people, he hasn't been blindly following Achilles at all. In fact, quite the opposite, as he's mostly done everything himself, and rightly so. He knows what the people want. While a lot of Assassin's Creed games question the morality of the Brotherhood, I like that Assassin's Creed 3 is almost about giving the creed another meaning, one that Connor is pioneering.
But what would you know beyond all the lies Achilles feeds you and the tales you tell yourself?
I know that the people wish to be free, and that men like Washington fight to make it so.
Please, the man is weak. He stumbles and stammers through each engagement, making it all up as he goes along. His pedigree is pathetic, his military record even more so. I could go on and on, but we'd be here for days, so manifold are his faults, so deficient are his merits. He must be dealt with. You as well.
Now it's probably best time to talk about Charles's plan, a scheme to kill George Washington. It's quite a clever one narratively, because it can be waved away as Charles wanting to take over and potentially become the King of America. However, it serves a dual purpose, as we only see things from Connor's perspective, and he doesn't really care too much for Washington, only that he's doing a damn better job than Charles would do.
All those years ago, the child in the forest was you.
I said I would find you.
And so you have.
It's like poetry, he's choking him again. Connor is now framed for conspiracy to murder George Washington and is set to be hanged before a last-minute save from Achilles. Connor must race to stop Thomas Hickey from assassinating George Washington, and in the commotion, he successfully kills Hickey, who has a nice grope of an invisible tit. Why did I write that? Hickey's death is quite an eye-opening one. He had no idea what the Templars were up to, or maybe he didn't care. Either way, he isn't in it for the ideology, but only for the money. He was a simple man who wished to be content and rich, passively allowing the Templars to get away with their power-hungry schemes. The bigger picture wasn't important to Hickey. Living each day like it was his last is why he isn't bothered when it's his time to go, because he lived his life for himself and not for others. This contrasts with Connor, who has used his tragedy and suffering so that other people can have a better quality of life, in a future that he himself may never see. After Hickey's death, General Putnam goes to kick his corpse, but Connor stops him, saying that Hickey was still a man. I think this is a nice callback to AC2, when Mario teaches Ezio to be more respectful of his targets, and it's good to see Connor remain respectful and calm when dealing with his enemies, so that he doesn't slip and become like them.
It's quite impressive what you've accomplished.
Is that a compliment?
Now, don't misconstrue. I'm sure the whole endeavor will end tragically. But to have come this far, well, it's more than I ever expected.
The people yearn for freedom but feared to grab hold of it. That fear is gone now.
Thanks to you?
No. This they did on their own.
You diminish your role. But you have always been of humble heart.
We finally see Achilles and Connor come to an understanding here, after they worked together at the end of the previous sequence, and it's nice to see the two of them once again be on the same pair. Oh wait, never mind.
Don't do this, Connor!
Then what would you propose we do? Sit and watch while the Templars take control? We are sworn to stop them, or have you forgotten?
Assassins are meant to be quiet, precise. We do not go announcing conspiracies from the rooftops to all who pass by.
Who are you to lecture anyone? You locked yourself away in this crumbling heap and gave up on the Brotherhood entirely. Since the day I arrived, you've done nothing but discourage me. And on the rare occasions you've chosen to help, you've done so little, you may as well have done nothing at all.
How dare you!
Then tell me, on whose watch did the Brotherhood falter? Whose inaction allowed the Templar Order to grow so large that it now controls an entire nation?
If I sought to dissuade you, it was because you knew nothing. If I was reluctant to contribute, it was because you were naive. 1,000 times you would have died and taken God knows how many with you. Let me tell you something, Connor. Life is not a fairy tale, and there are no happy endings.
No. Not when men like you are left in charge.
Okay, I'm gonna give this one a pass. Yes, making Connor and Achilles have a constant back and forth doesn't help either of them as characters, but I think the writers of this game knew that their strengths lay in compelling arguments, and so most scenes boil down to a conflict, and I would complain that it gets repetitive, but they keep bringing up so many good points that I'm completely fine with this. Just to take a step back though, this does however cause a lot of damage to Connor's character. Since sequence 6, he's only had a calm conversation with Achilles maybe twice. I don't think that this is Connor's fault, however because the scenario fits it, trying to tell a scared old man to trust you isn't going to be a simple one. Only Connor's humbleness and empathy allow him to get through to Achilles as nobody else could. This game is full of twists and turns, but making the Grand Master of the Templars so passive in the story ends up playing to its strengths. When I first played this game, I was 12, and I was always confused why Haytham wasn't the main villain, but now looking back, I understand the decision to make his second in command the truly evil one, because it allows our Grand Master to be less of an antagonist. I mean, he still is absolutely an antagonist, but Haytham is a fan favourite character for his wit and charm, putting him in a hilarious double act where Connor plays the straight man, adding some much needed levity to the game, and it also allows the two of them to actually have a conversation, and an assassin and Templar to have a long-winded dialogue about their ideologies. In their first encounter, we see Haytham is disappointed that his enemy doesn't have better arguments against him, and it's where his upper-class dialect conflicts brilliantly with Connor's grounded and more blunt approach to dialogue. The following mission proves this quite well, as we see both Haytham and Connor's skills played to their strengths, as Connor can track down a mercenary for the traitor Benjamin Church, a Templar traitor that both Haytham and Connor share a common interest in removing from the board. Meeting in New York, Haytham and Connor have this fantastic exchange.
What is it the Templars truly seek?
Order. Purpose. Direction. No more than that. It's your lot that means to confound with this nonsense talk of freedom. Time was. The assassins professed a far more sensible goal. That of peace.
Freedom is peace.
Oh no. It's an invitation to chaos. Only look at this little revolution your friends have started. I have stood before the Continental Congress and listened to them stamp and shout. All in the name of liberty. But it is just noise.
And this is why you favor Lee?
He understands the needs of this would-be nation far better than the jobberknolls who profess to represent it.
It seems your tongue has tasted sour grapes. The people have made their choice, and it was Washington.
The people chose nothing. It was done by a group of privileged cowards seeking only to enrich themselves. They convened in private and made a decision that would benefit them. Oh, they might have dressed it up with pretty words. That does not make it true. The only difference, Connor, the only difference between myself and those you aid is that I do not feign affection.
Here we get Haytham's main motivation for leaving the Assassins, and also some points on Connor's side, as we see both of them provide a solid argument. Haytham feels that changes must be made in the long term to benefit people, however Connor feels like the problems must be addressed in the present, and not wait to come to pass. It leans into Connor's naivety, but also Haytham's apathy for the common man. It's why Connor is unable to see Washington's issues, and Haytham is unable to see Lee's. There is no right answer, as both of the choices are bad ones, but a decision has to be made, which makes this conflict even more interesting. I think a problem that modern Assassin's Creed games have is not that the assassins are wrong, but the situation doesn't lend itself to make them the lesser of two evils. The assassins have never been saints, but They are always in pursuit of the right ideals, whereas the Templars act selfishly, and that's why a situation in AC3 in which the revolution is a lose-lose is such an interesting backdrop. But enough of the Assassins and Templars, as the layers begin to unravel, and Connor and Haytham begin to discuss things more as a father and son. This leads to a discussion on how this all came to pass.
Must be strange for you, discovering my existence as you have.
I'm actually curious to know what your mother might have said about me. Always wondered what life might have been like had she and I stayed together. How is she, by the way?
Dead. Murdered.
What? I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, you're sorry. I found my mother burning alive. I'll never forget her face as she sent me away. Charles Lee is responsible for her death by your order. And you're sorry.
It's impossible. I gave no such order. I spoke the opposite, in fact. I told them to give up the search for the precursor site. We were to focus on more practical pursuit.
It is done. And I'm all out of forgiveness.
Now this is where we can see once again with hindsight that Haytham wasn't in fact responsible for Zio's death, and is in fact telling the truth throughout this exchange. I do believe that Haytham truly cared for Connor's mother, and chose to leave her and Connor out of the conflict to keep them safe, but a misunderstanding has made him antagonised by his son. It's also important to note that immediately after this, Haytham will go digging to find out what happened. He wants to know the truth, which I don't think an uncaring father and husband would have done. Skipping forward to when Benjamin Church is caught and killed, you may think his memory corridor sequence would be a boring one, since he's had no screen time. However, he in fact provides a fantastic third party. A man who doesn't believe in the Assassins or Templars, but simply the British Crown. He believes since the British made supplies for the colonists that they are owed. The theme of this sequence is that there is no right or wrong path, and Church says this outright. It's also good to see Connor take this on board, and consider what Church is saying. Throughout each kill, Connor has become more and more talkative, and you can see his arguments develop to the point where he can effectively argue back with his enemy, especially as their arguments become more and more valid, to warrant his response. Connor's takeaway from this appears to be unity between the two factions. However, this seems to be Connor getting caught up in the moment and not thinking clearly. Excited at the idea of his father being in his life again, he goes back to speaking vague and immaturely, which shows the unfortunate hold that Haytham has over him, and their toxic relationship is not good for Connor, as Achilles warns him, but allows him to continue seeing Haytham. Connor asks that Haytham show him results, instead of simply preaching the Templar ideology to him, and so Haytham stays true to this and reveals Washington's plan.
And what's this?
Private
Oh,
correspondence.
of course it is. Would you like to know what it says, Connor? It seems your good friend here has just ordered an attack on your village. Although attack might be putting it mildly. Well, tell him, Commander.
We've been receiving reports of Allied natives working with the British. I've asked my men to put a stop to it.
By burning their villages and salting the land, by calling for their extermination, according to this letter. Not the first time either. Tell them what you did 14 years ago.
That was another time. The 7 Years' War.
And so now you see what happens to this great man when under duress. He makes excuses, displaces blame, does a great many things, in fact, except take responsibility.
Enough! Who did what and why must wait. My people come first.
Then let's be off.
No. You and I are finished.
Son.
Do you think me so soft that by calling me son I might change my mind? How long did you sit on this information, or am I to believe you discovered it now? My mother's blood may stain another's hands, but Charles Lee is no less a monster, and all he does by your command. A warning to you both. Choose to follow me or oppose me, and I will kill you.
Connor's words here are honestly brilliant. He manages to keep a level head where Haytham was trying to exploit his moment of weakness. After all his trying to convince Connor that the Templars were in the right, in the end his final attempt was to turn him against Washington, and once again have a common threat like with Benjamin Church, in the hopes of forming a permanent alliance between the Assassins and Templars. However, Connor isn't so easily persuaded, and instead points out the flaws in both the American and British sides of the war. Whereas earlier it could have been implied that Connor was becoming invested in the American Revolution, now he wants nothing more to do with it, and boils back down to his basic mission, to protect his people from the influence of the Revolution, and as an assassin, remove Charles Lee from his position. Connor rushes to his village only to discover that Charles Lee has beaten him there, and twisted the minds of the villagers to believe they must take a side and fight against Washington, and brainwashed them into thinking that Connor had sided with Washington in an attempt to destroy their people. This leads to Connor having to chase down the hunters from his village and incapacitate them to stop from causing further damage, with the final target being his childhood friend Kanandokon, acting as an example of just how far Charles Lee's influence can spread, manipulating even Connor's only true friend into attacking him, and Connor has no other choice but to kill him in the process. Here we get a perspective on what life has been like back at Connor's village after so long away. His people had grown even more afraid of outside influence, and whereas as a teenager Kanandokon was trusting of colonists, he's now siding with whoever will end the conflict sooner. He dies thinking that if the revolution simply had a winner and the conflict came to an end, that his people would be safe again. The theme of this sequence has been about exposing the truth, firstly with Haytham and Washington, and now finally with Connor. He sees the truth that his village will never be safe, and he's been a fool to try and protect them, in a bubble, when the outside world is growing in power, and their chances of survival are slim at best. You have to commend the performance here, as Connor has had to kill his best friend, who became so negatively impacted by Charles Lee that he no longer resembled the boy Connor used to go out hunting with, and even during his final speech, he showed no signs of regret or empathy towards his friend, believing that Connor had betrayed the village. After this we get the Battle of Monmouth, in which Charles Lee makes a load of stupid decisions for which Connor has to pick up the pieces, helping the soldiers retreat safely from the British advance. This is where we see that Washington is no use to Connor. He wants to investigate Charles Lee's actions and do things by the book, to see him dealt with. However, Connor now knows the reach the Templars have, and that no prison will keep him. At the beginning of his journey, Connor remarked that he would do anything to avoid having to kill the Templars, but now he sees that there is no other alternative, and that is none more present than here.
The time for that is long past.
This must be done properly, else we're no better than those we oppose. Never mind the political ramifications of such an act.
Should you choose to spare Lee's life, then I will take it myself. Enjoy your victory, Commander. It will be the last I deliver you.
Going into the penultimate sequence, Connor speaks of how he aims to leave Haytham alive, in the hopes that without his order, he may yet be able to find peace. He seems like he still has a genuine sympathy for his father, despite what he said prior. We also see Achilles is on his deathbed. The game provides side quests relating to the homestead that fill in the gaps of this, by establishing Connor building up his community around the manor. We see a lighter side of Connor in these missions, however they end with Achilles passing away, which I don't wish to gloss over. However, we would be here all day if I went through these missions separately. At this point in the game, Achilles is happy that Connor has completed his mission, and that Charles Lee has been removed from power for his insubordination at the Battle of Monmouth, and therefore has no influence over Connor's village. However, whilst Charles Lee lives, there is still no telling of what could happen next. I think that despite Achilles being in the right here, we get a glimpse once again of his cold demeanour that is much more present in Rogue. We can see Achilles is still seeking some kind of vengeance, even to the end, and pleads with Connor to see things as black and white and assures him that Haytham is beyond saving. With this, Connor begins his plan.
Do what exactly?
Kill Charles Lee. He hides within Fort George, which is itself surrounded by a militarized district. I cannot hope to infiltrate it directly, so I will go under instead.
Increíble.
The tunnels leading to the fort have been filled in. While I secure the Admiral's ships, I need you to clear them for me.
And the ships?
When signaled, they will bombard the fort.
Breaching its walls and creating a distraction, I see.
In the chaos, I will slip inside, find Charles Lee, and silence him forever.
This, however, doesn't quite go to plan. When lighting the signal for the ships to fire upon New York, one of the cannonballs snags Connor on the way down, and he is seriously injured on his way to the fort, now a vulnerable attack. Despite his worsened condition, Connor pushes forward anyway in the hopes that this will be the final stand, and he is determined to kill Charles Lee and bring an end to the Templar plot. However, when he reaches the fort, he is met with an altogether worse sight. Haytham is waiting for him. Now Haytham isn't putting on a facade and reveals his true feelings towards Charles Lee. Calling humanity sheep that need guidance, he proves himself to be no less forgiving towards the people who create the main divide in the conflict. Connor has already taken Charles Lee away from the chessboard, removing him from command and leaving him without any power. Yet Haytham is deluded and believes that Charles Lee's rule is inevitable, and that with his strength and power he can be restored. Any player can see at this point in the game, Haytham has nobody left standing beside him, and this supposed influence they have no longer exists. It takes very good writing to have these characters be friends 1 hour prior, and yet now be on opposite ends of the spectrum of morality, and it make it all flow so naturally. Haytham was the one thing keeping Connor from giving up on the Templars entirely. He was the first member of their order that had a shred of redemption lurking within. But the tragedy here is that Haytham is not truly the Grand Master. He is simply serving Lee. He's not the final boss of the game. That's another firework. He's not the final boss of the game because he simply is not in control of the Templars anymore. He is simply their founder. The fight between Haytham and Connor sees them both at a disadvantage. However, Connor's instinct and ability to use the environment around him allows him to defeat Haytham in one-to-one combat. It's a set piece like this that makes you think of it as a pure consequence of the circumstances. In any other situation, the pair had proven that something could have been salvaged from their relationship, and Connor was fully willing to let him live. However, you could say this betrayal of that generosity was only a matter of time. I like the sudden shift Haytham has. As soon as Connor kills him, he stops caring about his ideology and of the Templars, but thinks purely of Connor as his son. It's something that AC3 has excelled at. Can you truly separate someone from their beliefs enough that you can find a common ground? Haytham himself points out that his major flaw was not killing Connor when he had the chance. He saw all the signs thereof, as he says, conviction, strength and courage. He knew what Connor was capable of, but let his guilt at not being around to raise a son get the better of him, and this weakness led to the downfall of the Templars. It shows that despite Haytham preaching that all he wanted was to be at peace under one rule, he didn't treat everyone as equal. He still gave Connor a chance. In the game, Connor only says goodbye, father. However, in the Forsaken novel, which tells the story of Haytham, we get a speech that was cut from the final game, which gives us Connor's full thoughts on his father. I would play this now, at the appropriate time, however I would like to save it for the end, as I think it serves as a better conclusion to the story. Earlier in this video I discussed Connor's mohawk, and its significance to his culture, as a sign that he was going into a darker place, but with the promise of returning. Here we reach that place. Connor dons his war paint and prepares for the final task, to kill Charles Lee. It's as simple as that. Charles Lee, as we know, has no deep motivation other than being
the most devious bastard in New York City.
And at Haytham's funeral, he leaves himself entirely vulnerable to attack, and so Sequence 12 begins the hunt to take down Charles Lee once and for all. There's very little dialogue in this section, as Connor is purely acting on instinct and rage, doing everything he can to kill Charles. Whilst none of his methods are very assassin-like, it does create an incredibly grand and cinematic feeling for the final act of AC3. One mission of note is chasing Charles Lee through a partially built ship. Not only does the mission start on the same pier that Haytham and Charles first met at, back in Sequence 2, but the ship starts to set fire, which is a good harken back to Connor's origins, with the blaze in his village. He was ushered into this life through fire, and it's how he'll leave it too. To see Charles finally on the back burner and running in fear is immensely satisfying, and to skip ahead a bit, we finally see this grand epic come to its conclusion in a quiet pub in the frontier, where Charles and Connor are weary and beaten down from their encounters, and Charles finally stops running. I think it's very telling that Charles doesn't get a memory corridor sequence to explain himself, because in Connor's eyes, there was nothing more to be said. I think this concludes the conflict of the game incredibly effectively, and it's one of my favourites in the franchise. It's just a quiet drink between two men that will never see eye to eye, and through that found a mutual respect for each other right through until the end. 6 months later, Connor returns to his people to find the Patriots have driven them away, and the village all but abandoned, aside from the Peace of Eden. Speaking to Juno, we see that Connor still feels like he failed in his mission, and his people were not saved. However, Juno reassures him that he still made a difference, and is destined to do so again in the future, thanks to Haytham's pendant that he recovered, which aids in the modern-day plotline. However, Connor is left on a bittersweet ending that even though he found and brought freedom to the colonists, he had to lose his peoples in the process. Before we move on to the conclusion, I think it's only fitting to play the audio recording from Connor's tremendous voice actor delivering the final speech from the Forsaken novel.
Mother, Father, I am sorry. I have failed you both. I made a promise to protect our people. I thought if I could stop the Templars, if I could keep the revolution free from their influence, that those I supported would do what was right. They did, I suppose, do what was right for them. As for you, Father, I thought I might unite us, that we would forget the past and forge a better future. In time, I believed you could be made to see the world as I did, to understand. But it was just a dream. This too I should have known. Were we not meant to live in peace then? Is that it? Are we born to argue? To fight? So many voices, each demanding something else. It has been hard at times, but never harder than today. To see all I worked for, perverted, discarded, forgotten. You would say I have described the whole of history, Father. Are you smiling then? Hoping I might speak the words you long to hear? To validate you? To say that all along you were right? I will not. Even now, faced as I am with the truth of your cold words, I refuse. because I believe things can still change. I may never succeed. The assassins may struggle another 1,000 years in vain, but we will not stop. Compromise. That is what everyone has insisted upon. And so I have learned it. But differently than most, I think. I realize now that it will take time, that the road ahead is long and shrouded in darkness. It is a road that will not always take me where I wish to go, and I doubt I will live to see its end. But I will travel down it nonetheless. For at my side walks hope. In the face of all that insists I turn back, I carry on. This is my compromise.
For this video, I asked a question regarding how Connor's character was handled in a single game, whereas predecessors had had multiple games to flesh out their characters. And from the runtime alone, I think we can agree that Connor certainly had a lot of development across the course of Assassin's Creed 3. This is a man that had always been fighting an uphill battle to make himself heard, experiencing loss from such a young age, and without growing up with any parents means he understands the importance of people and uniting them together to become stronger and rise against oppression. He put his all into the American Revolution and only got betrayal and ignorance in return, yet he still persisted. When Connor reignites the Assassin's Brotherhood, he rewrites the book on what an assassin should be. They are honest and uncensored, representing how the common man can make a difference. Connor's journey after AC3 sees him build a community, develop relationships and bring others into the fold to rebuild the Brotherhood stronger than ever. In a way, he carried his people and his village with him through the Assassins and carried their want for peace with him in his ideals. I think Assassin's Creed 3, whilst being a complex plot that takes many twists and turns that don't follow a traditional formula, is an incredibly well told story, and whilst I long to see what Connor's American Brotherhood would look like and how he would fare as a mentor, it begs the question of whether it was a story that needed to be told for Connor to be a good character, and I'd argue a solid no. No, it doesn't. Ezio didn't need Brotherhood and Revelations to become a good character, but the more time we spent with him, the deeper his character went, and I can definitely see a lot of avenues that they could have taken Connor's character down. My conclusion here is that I don't think an Assassin's Creed character has ever gotten worse the longer they appeared. The screen time of recurring characters has been used very effectively and only strengthened the storytelling across the series. I was 12 when AC3 came out, and I played it religiously until Black Flag the following year. It was the first AC game I bought on release, and it still holds a really special place in my heart for being the game that made me fall in love with the series. Whilst Brotherhood was my first Assassin's Creed game, I never enjoyed it as much as I did 3, for its powerful storytelling and especially the movement system and music. But most of all, it was Connor. I appreciated a character that wasn't the popular kid, but the stoic leader that had a good moral compass to follow, and I would say he plays a part in how I hold myself today. That you don't need to be the loudest person in the room if your actions say more than words ever could.
Even those men you sought to save have turned their backs on you. Yet you fight. You resist. Why?
Because no one else will.